such a field that is male dominated and often regarded as a, field that women should not venture into?
Sure. So I mean, in general, I should say I work as a multimedia journalist. So I do, text. I don't do as much photo, and I'll just say that photojournalism is a totally different beast and such a skill.
Okay.
So that's not something that I do too much of, but video, TV, certainly. And for me, I was lucky to get an education in multimedia journalism. So when I went to school, I learned a bit of everything. And what I found when I got to Kenya is that there are just some stories that demand that medium. There are some stories that people need to see it. It is extremely challenging. And I think anyone here who's done video knows there are certain stories where you look at the story and you say, well, this is just not going to work for video. This is just going to be, we're not going to find it. It's not going to be compelling. It's going to be offices or it's going to be documents. But for those stories that are human-centered, especially, and I think we'll dive into specific stories more as we go through. But I just did this piece on how climate change is affecting child marriage, and I've seen so many beautiful reports and such well-researched reports on climate change. But I think until you see what it looks like to see a little girl being married off, people don't quite feel it necessarily. And so, what we wanted with that particular project was to say, how do we get people's hearts to just break in a way, and to really understand the stakes that are, at play here with something like video journalism. So, you mentioned a male-dominated field. We were up in northern Kenya. We were dealing with communities that are a bit more traditional. It was an all-female team, actually. So it was myself, a female videographer. I was the producer reporter. She was the videographer. It was challenging. I mean, to get some of these older to get some of these older gentlemen to sort of speak to you in a culture where they're not used to being approached by a young woman who says, "Can I ask you some questions?" and sticks a microphone in their face. I mean, that's tough. But I think there's a part of you that kind of just has to say this, there's a bigger purpose to what I'm doing. And so whatever pushback you get, whatever, looks or comments you get, you just sort of, you dress appropriately and you keep going with the microphone and you say, all right, here I am. So you see you both.
I know that feeling, Faith. I know that feeling. I feel that way sometimes. I just feel like giving up at some point because of a lot of barriers, but I just say to myself, this is what I'm meant to do, so I just have to do it. So Faith, talk to us about your journey, considering the fact that you're in such a male-dominated field. Yeah, I think, Faith, your mic is on mute, so we can't, your mic is mute, so we can't hear you yet.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah,
I think I laughed because I've also encountered the cultural barrier.
Okay.
And actually for me, it's when I began this field. When I was just entering into the industry, I started off at a village, at a county in northern Kenya, where the culture actually dictates everything. So for me, it was more of, because I started in radio first as a volunteer, but I was like, I saw an opportunity and I told myself, this opportunity requires these skills. The funniest thing is I learned taking videos within the shortest time, because I remember the first assignment was, we had a national holiday and it required me to go shoot the video and then send it to the newsroom. So I asked a colleague of mine, can you kindly just show me the basics? Because that's what you need to kickstart you. Because what I normally tell a person in a video, you learn every day. You learn every day. So I told that guy, can you kindly show me how to shoot a video? And he did that. It was 30 minutes before that function. And I was able to shoot and edit and send to the newsroom. So that's where I began. Although I had a background of multimedia because I studied multimedia, but then I wasn't into it because my mind was sort of fixed. I want to be a broadcaster. So I kept pushing all these technicals aside. But then when the need came up and that was the only opportunity that I was there, then I told myself, you know what, I have to do whatever it takes to be the best in the field. And that's how I started it. But although the cultural barrier in that area was a very, very serious challenge, just as Neha said, because it's a place where they believe the culture is still rich, it's still virgin. And so being a lady standing there and you're going like you're filming, and most of these people, they're still like, they don't wear clothes, especially men. They just use those shuka, we call them shukas. And now you're there, you've been raised up in a different culture. You know you're not supposed to look at an old man naked, and you're there. You have to do it, it's your work. So you just push them behind, like Neha said, you just push all those things behind and you do whatever you're supposed to do.
Exactly. Yeah, I think these are, most of the challenges that most journalists get to face. But like I said before, this is what we're meant to do, and we just have to push for it and make it happen. So we are in a global pandemic, and it's affecting journalists. Because as I speak with you, in the Gambia here, the television that I work for, which is QTV, has been affected. We had few journalists that have been affected, and that has made the job overwhelming for other journalists that are here, the ones that tested negative. So really it has affected, it's the new normal, and it's affecting journalists because we are frontliners. To so many, we're not frontliners, it's just health personnel, but as journalists, we're frontliners as well because we go out there. So talk to us about how this has changed your work. Faith.
Uh, Actually, when the pandemic began, I remember the first story I did. It was about a couple who had postponed their wedding. But actually, at that time, it wasn't as serious as it was because it was just after the presidential ruling, I think 4 days after, I did a story about that. But we had the company I work for, the BBC, has so many issues when it comes to high risk assessment and everything. So I had to fill all these high risk forms, and it was just, I wasn't going far, it was just within, and there were no like serious high risk issues, but I was forced to do all these things. So getting to the venue, you have to keep those meter distance. I was told to keep at least 3 meter distance away from, and Neha, with that, getting some proper images, getting some proper pictures to tell your story becomes so difficult. So I was forced to film on one location. I was not allowed to go to where they stay. I was just allowed to do the interview, but in an open field. So I ended up having to use cutaways that were from their previous pre-wedding. I was forced to just maneuver however much I can, because it was strictly, you have to shoot it in an open field, and you're not supposed to go to where they stay, because that contributes to high risk. So it was so challenging for me, because this is a story, if you are allowed to visit places and be able to tell your story in a way that you would love to, you would have been able to come out with a very, very compelling piece. So for me, that was a very, very big challenge. And it still has been a challenge for me, because ever since the pandemic starts, we had to adjust, because we were looking at, there's no going out again.
Yeah.
You cannot go out and do your stories like it was normally the case. So I was forced to shift a little bit, and I ended up doing most of radio production and online writing. So actually the pandemic has really, really, really affected videographers.
Okay, so Neha, is it same experience with Faith or different?
Yeah, no, it is very similar. The only thing I would add is I think as an independent journalist, there's an element of salesmanship. I know that within the BBC, Faith is pushing her stories and trying to get her stories picked up. But for myself, and I tend to try to collaborate a lot with other freelancers. And so what we had to do then was I had sort of a docket of stories lined up that I was going to do, March, April, May, June, and everything got canceled. So there was a whole kind of reshifting of, okay, does this story have a COVID angle? So is this something we can keep on trying to push? And also looking at what are the stories that are urgent? What do we need to do right now? And so I think it's an additional layer of flexibility and having to be kind of quick on your feet. And additionally, what Faith said, really having to think about the multimedia, I recently did a story that did involve audio, and I think we would have loved to get video, but we just couldn't. We just couldn't, and it was putting too many people at risk for us to be going into their communities, as well as for for them to be exposing us. So we just stuck with radio, which was something we were able to do with a little bit more ease. We didn't need to worry about the visuals. We could stay far away but still get the sound. So I think it's just forcing journalists to be extremely, extremely creative and even more flexible than I think we already have to be.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. But is this putting a stop to video and photography, the social distancing and all?
I don't think so. Yeah,
No,
Faith, go ahead.
not at all, because I think it has created a new opportunity for us to be more creative. Because there was let me call it, there was a strict manner in which we used to do our stories.
Right.
We had to follow this and this and this. So COVID-19 has not only been a challenge, but it has also like there's a positive way to it. Because for us, it opened our eyes, opened our mind, like, oh, so you can actually get a very good video by just asking someone to record themselves, because there are interesting things we are getting. If Neha was complaining about her background, and I was like, these are the additives we get now with COVID that we couldn't get any other time. Because when you plan with someone, you need to go and do the story. There's an element of originality that you miss from that, because a person will prepare the compound, maybe the house, clean it, and you won't be able to get that naturality in it. So with COVID, when you ask someone to record, and there are so many videos that have been done by other videographers that are so good, which the subjects have themselves recorded themselves, and you get to see, oh wow, if I were to go put my big camera there, my stand, probably. And then there's this aspect also of having this relationship with that with the audience, or with the subject. So if you go put your tripod there with your camera, big camera, probably won't be able to get such an emotional video like the one you get just from them recording themselves.
Okay. So now let's talk about some of the challenges that both of you go through when capturing images or videos during disasters. What are some of the things? I mean, we talked about the cultural aspect, which Faye delved into in depth in relation to the cultures, how to take pictures or videos of people that are so cultural, you can't look at them properly and all of that. So now let's talk about all the challenges that you get to face, putting the cultural aspect aside that we've already dealt with. Neha.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing I'm thinking of is in Kenya, there's been a lot of and that's been something that's been used quite a lot. And so I think one of the things that I found with that is, you've got this element of COVID, you've got people out in the streets protesting, you've got the police, fighting back with tear gas and, the methods that they use. And it really makes for a challenging environment. And I think so journalist safety is something that, we always pay attention to, I think, and videographers and photographers tend to be on the front lines more than most. But this is something where, there's this added element. It's not just a flak jacket, it's not just a gas mask. It is now, you've also got COVID, right? Which is this threat that's floating around in the air. People are wearing their masks down as chin straps. There's no real effective way to do this. And then you see that the police, in these particular situations, I noticed the police are rounding up people who are, quote unquote, breaking curfew or disturbing the peace, and, putting them into these trucks where they're packed together. And so I think I personally have been finding myself weighing, okay, what is the story that we need to tell? And what do we need to get it? And, normally I think most journalists feel this push, okay, what is the best thing I can do? The best shot, the best interview. And if you feel like you've got something that's 95%, you say, okay, let's keep going. Let me get that 100%, that perfect interview. I think now it's now we're saying, okay, 95 might be enough. We've got what we need. Let's go. And so I think that's something a little bit different, that we're operating under this kind of, all right, what's the best that we can do to tell the story and also get out safely, versus, you know, let's stay in as long as we possibly can to get the best story that's going to be, you know, the number one on the nightly news.
Yeah.
I think that might be a big difference.
Okay, so Faith, same experience? Are you pushing for
Yeah.
100 or are you at 95?
It's normally a thin line between that 95 and pushing for 100,
Yeah.
because you always when you're at 95, most of the times your conscience is already numb. And by the time you keep pushing and pushing and pushing, it's only at that moment when you finished with the story, you've already edited it, and now you're alone, you start thinking about the events, and then you wonder, oh my God, what was I just doing? Like, where was I? Because you can't even get even like what your mind was thinking at that time. It's completely like you are in a numb state. So there's normally a very thin line between that 95 and 100%. And most of the times, I don't know, it's just God who takes care of us. Because
Yeah.
I can't promise you that I'll get to 95 and turn back. I
Okay.
can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. All right. So now let's talk about Neha. I saw that you did a story about child marriage and climate change, that relationship. I saw that on Twitter, and I think that piece was really good. So talk to us about how you were able to get people to tell you their personal stories. How do you get the stories out of these people? Because some of these things are so personal, and I believe there's a technique to it, or it comes naturally. How do you do it?
I mean, that was a very tough story. So we were, for those who haven't seen it, we were up in northern Kenya. The communities there are very, very traditional, very close knit. Everybody knows everybody, but of course they know when you're not part of the community. So what my colleague, I was working with a colleague, and the two of us, what we did was we took a long time to make our way into the community. And we did that through a member of the community. So there's a woman named Nuria. She's a women's rights activist. She's also from that tribe, and she's also from that region. People know her. I think, you know, if we had shown up there, you know, Muzungus with our cameras, people would have said, you know, go home. You know, you're not welcome here. And I think that's very valid. So what we tried to do, respectful of the community and their values. So through Nuria, she was able to, we spent a lot of time with her on the phone, months and months. She would go and visit a family, she would talk to them and tell them what we're doing, why we're doing it. And, you know, she would say, are you part of this? Many of them said no, and we said, okay, thank you, and we appreciate it. And then so slowly, a few families that were open to speaking with us, who understood number of guarantees, right? I mean, we're not going to show your daughter's face very closely. You know, we'll show her feet, we'll show her hands. So people feel more comfortable that we were not there as, you know, members of the government trying to arrest them or get money from them, that we were actually there because we wanted people to see and understand what was happening and why it was happening. And mostly these communities are so very devastated by climate change that I think there was an element of teamwork that we tried to present. We said, you know, look, we understand that climate change is destroying your land. You know, you don't have grass to feed your animals, you don't have water to give your animals, they're dying. And this is a very pastoralist region. And so we were able to say, look, people don't really know why this matters. People don't know why it's so important that we address climate change. So can you allow us to, and try to, you know, there were a number of different, I think, playing ourselves with them and saying, look, what we want is to show people why this needs to be dealt with. And I think for a community like the Gabra up in the north, who are quite isolated and don't necessarily have access to government officials or to the people who are agents of change, it was something where we could say, look, we can't, well, you know, you never guarantee as a journalist this will change your life, of course. That would be a mistake to make that kind of statement. But you can say, look, this is what we're going to try to do to help. And the more people who know about this, the better it is for you. So that was how we approached it. And then when it came to speaking to the younger girls, I think the biggest thing that we did with that was we took our time. We went back multiple times. We showed up. There were times where we just came and we just sat for an hour and we just kind of hung out, and we watched her get ready, or we just kept her company while, you know, all the wedding preparations were happening. We didn't turn the camera on. And so I think the biggest thing with young subjects, or in this case, I would say she was, you know, a victim or a survivor. When you're dealing with people who are that vulnerable and that young, especially young girls who are not used to being asked, what do you think? I mean, the question, you know, how do you feel about your marriage was like, you know, there was nothing, right? There, what do you mean? How do I feel about it? So we had to ask in very small, are you excited for your clothes? How are you scared? You know, like these very bite-sized questions that finally she was able to answer. The two young women that we spoke to were able to answer these. And so we had to kind of, rather than asking this big question of how do you feel about your wedding, we had to ask these small questions and put the answers together to understand how they were feeling. And so it took time. I think if we had gone up there with one day and just jumped in and said, tell us how you feel, I don't think we would have gotten much. So, you know, really taking the time and the effort and getting to know people, building trust. And then of course, having a member of the community with us was absolutely critical. We couldn't have done it without her.
Okay, so Faith, do you use the same strategy, making sure you feel their pain as well? Because the fact that you also explain to them the effects of climate change and all that, at some point, I think they kind of felt like you feel the impact of it and you're trying to share it with them. Just that can make somebody talk to you. So do you do the same thing, Faith, kind of share what they're going through with them and tell them it's a collective solution that we need to put on the table to solve this particular problem?
Yeah, actually, I use the same strategy but you'll find that at the end of the day, it becomes so difficult when you send to the field within few days, and you're supposed to come back with a story. So at the end of the day, building relationship is very, very important. That's where everything begins, because you come to this remote village. People there don't know you. They've already identified you as someone who is not from within the community. So you'll need to be accompanied by that person from within the community, a person from within the community. You will need to build that relationship. And most of the times you find that you end up using a lot of time building that relationship. And then you have very little time to work with your story. So at the end of the day, if you had planned, you had a proper plan of your story, then it will be easy for you, because you'll have that's the set of questions that you'll need for your story. You'll have had have had pictured the edit of your story before you have even done the story. You'll know, I'll need this question to begin with, I'll need this question to end with it. This will be my goal of the story. The first 3 seconds, I expect this person to have told me this and this. So at the end of the day, that relationship aspect is so very important.
In the images that we use and the photos that we take, how do we put a message of hope in those images, especially when some of the stories are so kind of bleak and so sad? How do you do things to present a message of hope? Is that even possible? I think that was right.
Yeah. Okay. First of all, it depends with the story that you do, because at the end of the day, it is not up to you to convince your subject that, you know what, after this story, actually this is what is gonna happen. But what you need to do is just to give them that hope that I'm going to try my best. I'm taking this story, I'll raise this issue with the relevant authorities, and if help comes, well and good. But if it can't, we'll look for another time again, come push again the agenda until like we get now the solutions. Yeah.
Do you think that is possible in any way?
To put hope into a story?
Yeah, inject hope or resilience into a photo or a story or video.
I think that it is, and actually, just speaking from the photography perspective, and this is as a viewer, right? Because I'm not a photographer myself, but I've worked with some amazing photographers, and I've seen, like, I mean, you could have a scene. Let's even, continue building off of the climate change. You've got this very bleak, what would look to people to be a very harsh landscape. It's dry, it's hot, it's windy, and you've got these women who are just like, they're dressed like butterflies. I mean, they're so colorful. And you just get, I've seen these photographers, they get this 1 second, mostly the women are serious, they're stern faced. Suddenly someone says something and they all start laughing. And that's like when the photographer will take this shot, and you've got these women who, it's not that their environment has changed. It's the same, it's equal, that anything else has necessarily changed. It's just like this one moment of positivity or joy that makes you feel like, if people can see the joy in these small moments, and it's just it's images like that that are so powerful, and to use something like that in a piece, or to get that 3 to 5 seconds of B-roll that you've got women laughing instead of women crying. I think it's really powerful. I think it can make a huge difference. And trying to find also characters who are a bit positive. So I think, our story about child marriage was quite grim, for the most part, and it was really, really sad. Able to find this one girl who was 17. She was still a child, but she was so optimistic. She had a 2-year-old daughter, and she said, like, no way, I'm ready. And so, in that and in those images, we were also able to find a message of hope, even though most of the young women that we interviewed, it was really heavy. It was a very heavy story. So I think you can do it not only through your images, but also through the characters that you choose and the way you write your script, that as well.
I think what has worked for us in this current era is the digital media, because there are those times you will do a story and you will see it and wait, no one to add your voice, and it will just end within that particular bulletin hour and it's dead. But now we have these additional voices whereby you do a certain story, even if like the relevant authorities tend to ignore, there's this voice that keeps pushing and pushing on the story each and every time. So at the end of the day, you get to get this the hope. You get to get the hope that at least at the end of the day, because nowadays you do a story and even if I'll do my part, yes, but even if they don't take it up from this massive, there's this massive people, there's this mass that will rally behind you at the end of the day, and you'll get to hear it being talked about day in, day out, until something like happens. Yeah.
So now let's talk about different challenges that all of you have faced, ranging from the fact that COVID-19 has changed the pattern of the way stories are being reported and the cultural aspect as well. But still on the challenges, because this is capturing disasters and some of the challenges that you face. So going back to challenges again, let's talk about what the biggest challenges that you have overcome is. Faye, talk to me. What are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to overcome in the field?
One of the biggest challenge is the biggest challenge that I've to overcome in the field is having to see into it that whatever I do at the end of the day, I don't let it affect me, because most of the times you find yourself in situations whereby you do certain things of story, certain kinds of stories that at the end they affect you as a person. So what I've learned is to learn to talk a lot about the stories that I've done that have hurt me. There's the human aspect of you, and then there's that photojournalist aspect. Because at times you go do stories that are disastrous. At the end of the day, when you come down after you finished editing that video, then everything starts coming back. Or most of the times while you're editing it, and then the reality now hits you and you're like, so what next? How will the situation turn out to be? So what I've learned is to be able to talk about these issues more. Whenever I get a chance, I share it a lot so that they don't get to affect me as an individual. And also being able to, you know, just draw the lines between, because at the end of the day, as a woman, we are most like, most of the times our emotions like guide us. You know, at the end of the day, you might be at the field and you're taking a story of a person and you feel like you can easily break down. Easily break. There's a day I went out with a colleague to do a certain story, and in the midst of the story, she's also a lady like me, and she got so emotional and she was almost breaking. And I told her, you know what, let me help you, let me hold your camera for you, and we can continue. You just take a break. And she went out, took quite some moment, then came back later. And you know, at the end of the day, if you don't have this emotional control by yourself, you'll end up, because at the end of the day, if this victim of yours is the one that is telling the story and she's breaking out, if you break out, there's this sort of weakness and fear that will inflict in that person.
But
So
Faith, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with those emotions not breaking down in front of that person who's emotionally weak already?
okay, I think it's you develop a heart of steel. As you keep on, there's sort of, you develop a heart of steel, but that doesn't mean that at that very moment, like it's when that you're safe. No, because this thing they come up haunting you again later on. So what I do is I share it a lot whenever I get the chance, and if I feel time I cry, I'm not my subject. Yeah. So
Okay, so now how do you deal with your emotions? Sometimes when you're out there at the field trying to capture that story, do you have emotional breakdowns, I should call it, sometimes, and how do you deal with it?
No, I think that's, I mean, when talking about challenges, I think that's definitely the biggest one when you're doing disaster reporting. I make the car like a safe space. Like the car is sort of like the home base. So you could be out of the car, you know, you're filming as Faith said, you know, you never want to break down because it's hard. I mean, a subject is telling you about their story. I mean, and so sometimes like I'll literally put my thumb into my palm, you know, like don't cry kind of thing. You hear the story, you finish, and then if I need to after, I'll take a break. I feel like the field is the one place I drink Coca-Cola. I know it's like terrible for you, but I love it so much, and it gives you that sugar rush. So I'll sit down in the car, I'll have a few sips of Coca-Cola. If I need to, I'll cry, and then I'll get back out. And I think that's, and I also think, you know, there's a part of it where you don't really want to ever be in a position where you don't feel anything, because I think if that's where you are, I mean, if you're hearing about, you know, refugees who have lost their homes, or, you know, young girls who have been, you know, raped by security forces, I mean, all the you know, stories that we hear, and you don't feel anything, I think that's probably also a sign that maybe you need to take a break, you know, and get back in touch. So it's a balance between feeling too much and having to sort of control that, and then also not feeling anything and being numb. And so I think there's a way to do that. But I agree, Faith, you know, talking to people, especially other journalists, because sometimes you talk to your friends or your family and they're like, so why do you do it then? You know, they're like, why, if it's so sad, why do you do it? And you're like, oh, because that's what I do. And so talking to journalists really helps, I think.
Yeah.
Or even sometimes aid workers, you know, people who have seen similar things, that can really, really help. You know, you feel like someone gets it and they understand.
Yeah, Faith, I think I agree with Neha in relation to relating to journalists themselves, because if you talk to someone that's not a journalist, then they start discouraging you. You know, why are you doing this? The big question comes up. So has that happened? Has that ever happened to you? Have you ever had that experience
yeah,
of
I've had,
family members discouraging you from what you do?
not necessarily, because I think not most of the time, because I live very far away from my family members, and not most of the times I get to talk about these issues with them. But
Okay.
I think my personality also tells more about me, because I'm this kind of person. Whenever I have something that is really like really eating me up, if I'm in an Uber, I'll talk with that Uber person. I'll give that person everything I need to talk about. By the end, I leave that car, then everything has gone away. So it's something that is in me that I don't necessarily keep it. I don't mind who I tell it to, because at the end of the day, what I want is just to vent it out. And also, I happen to be advantage, because within the BBC we normally have these sessions with the psychologist. And most of the time I go for these physiotherapy sessions, and for these psychological sessions, and which have been very, 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 very helpful. So at the end of the day, but most of the times, trust me, I don't like those kind of session where we have this person, just you and that him or her, telling them about all that you've experienced, because it tends to come out at different times. It might take a while. It might be immediate, or it might take months, days. So at the end of the day, when it comes and I want to vent it out, whoever is available at that time, I tell them, you know what, this is what I saw, this is what I did, and it's affecting me. Or if I am alone and I feel like crying, I'll cry it out at that particular moment, and that's it.
Yeah, let's cry it out. I totally agree with crying it out, because I think what Neha said is so true. At some point, we have feelings too. Not having feelings at some point means you're weak. So it has to be balanced. The emotions have to be balanced for you to be able to continue with your work. So I want questions coming from the participants. You can ask as much questions as you want, because I've already learned a lot already from these brilliant women. So I want more questions to come up, and then you guys ask questions about these challenges, and then they're here to answer. So we just have David saying about emotions. I think we're built differently. Some people will face and walk away like it's normal, while someone will literally scream if a cockroach crosses their path. Okay. Okay. So now, more questions coming in, more questions welcomed. Before we go to that, I know you guys have been doing this for long, and there are other journalists out there who would want to do what you're doing. So it's also good for you guys to give tips, you know, to give tips to these aspiring journalists who want to come on board, be journalists in general, or even photo and video journalists, just generally being in that journalism bubble. Like, what are some of the tips, Faith? What are some of the tips that you think a young person should follow to be able to get there?
I think what I can tell a person is first to accept the process. You know, you don't just wake up and start, you're not just given birth to and then you start walking. There's a process to it. And once you accept that process, each and every day you will build yourself, you will grow. And also by learning through what other people are doing. You know, I was watching Neha's stories, and actually I got a very, very different idea altogether. So it's all about watching other people's work. It's all about accepting that there's a process that you have to undergo. And you will not start today and then you become the best. And Neha will tell you in videography, like you can do a story, edit it completely, and then you feel, oh, you put in your best. If you're given a that video to work on, after a few minutes, even 10 minutes, you won't edit it the way you had edited it. So I normally say that we learn every day. We learn every day, and you being open to learning, you being like free, like you want to learn each and every day. Because even me, I see myself every time I look at somebody else's work, I'm like, oh my God, I want to be this creative, because I'll always identify something unique with each and every person's work. So it's all a matter of being open, trusting the process, and you'll get there.
Trust the process, being open, and you'll get there. So Neha, is it the same? Trusting the process, being open?
Yeah, and I also think, you know, taking risks and experimenting. So for me, as you know, someone who's working independently, I've done a lot of stuff where it's not necessarily, you know, it's not like the paid for work, or it's not something that even is mission necessarily. So I'm thinking back to like 2017 elections in Kenya, where I was relatively new, and I was just running around with my phone. And so I kept on doing these like live streams. So I would just turn the phone on, I would put it on Periscope or Twitter or something, and I would just start talking, here, I'm here, this is what I'm seeing, this is what people are saying. I'd grab a police officer, I'd grab a protester. And it's not that anyone was necessarily paying me to do that, but it was a way of just starting to get comfortable with reporting, starting to get comfortable with the camera, even though it was my own little smartphone. And so I also think that there's an element of entrepreneurialism and sort of just putting yourself out there and starting to make things. So I agree totally, Faith, trusting the process, but also the more you do, the more people see. And so, as long as you handle it with high standards, you don't take shortcuts, you treat it with journalistic integrity, even making your own little clips and your own videos and putting them on YouTube and that kind of thing. I mean, a lot of people have been noticed in that way. So I would certainly say, Twitter, Facebook, Periscope, also, those are great ways to start, even if you don't have a camera, you don't have a camera person, you don't have a crew, you don't have a computer to edit, you can just start doing these short things on your phone, and posting those and really, putting the hashtags and circulating those. And if you're really getting interesting stuff, people watch. I mean, that's the video journalism. There's always an audience. But it's another way where you can start out low budget, and just kind of start to see what you can cover. So it's another small tip.
Yeah. So Faith, how do you use social media to push your work? Because Neha talked about, Twitter, Facebook, and all of these social media handles. So how do you use social media to push your work?
I've not been actively doing that, but once in a while, I normally post links of my stories on my page. There's a page I created for just sharing the stories that I've done. So I've not been so actively into that. But for me, social media has been my source of story ideas, because most of the times I just scroll through. If I find people talking about a thing, it might be a small topic within a group, but the response, when you go through the comments, you find out that actually this can be really a story. So at the end of the day, you'll get so much in social media. You'll get so much to talk about, to turn around as stories within the social media.
Okay, so social media, I can see when I look at some of the comments on the chat right now, I can see that when Neha and Faith talked about emotion, when you talked about emotions, it really caught the attention of a lot of people, because I can see someone saying it is time we have workshop programs meant to calm journalists after covering events that involve a lot of things that can affect our psychology as journalists. And I think that is really important. So I know certain media houses do provide it, but not all media houses. As using the Gambia as an example, we don't have that because journalism is just starting today, I can say, because for 22 years we've been under dictatorial rule. So we just have few media houses in the Gambia starting. But I think what this person is suggesting is really important, that we have trainings as such, because we are frontliners. So I think it's important. What do you guys think?
Yeah, actually, I mean, there are a lot of really good free resources that journalists can rely on for trauma. Anything that is traumatic, whether it's tribal clashes, as somebody mentioned, whether it's terrorism or anything, really anything, even covering things like, COVID, which can be very traumatic as well. So there's, and I can send a list after this, but there are places like Rory Peck, it's RORYPECK. There's a number of other resources developed by journalists around the world. Frontline Freelance Register is another one. And they have made these available, like publicly available, and it has everything from, videos there's yoga for trauma for journalists that's available for free on YouTube. There's meditation sessions, there's, I think, group therapy sessions, there's, you know, tips and tricks, there's things like, how do you know that if you're dealing with, you know, if you're waking up in the morning and crying every day, what's your next step? I mean, you know that there's something wrong, you know that you're being affected, so what do you do next? So I will, after this, for people who are interested, I can send out a list, and maybe we can circulate that so that people can take a look at that, because there are a lot of resources. And I think, you know, people were not paying attention to this. I think trauma used to be something we assumed was for soldiers. You know, soldiers deal with trauma, and that was kind of it. And I think the body of work and research has expanded, and now people say, you know, you don't have to be a soldier. You could be a journalist standing next to a soldier, and you're going to be equally traumatized. So there's a lot of good stuff out there, and you don't need to be part of a media house. You don't need to pay for it. You know, there's stuff that's available just to help you, because people recognize that this is a problem.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing, Nneka. I see a question here that says, how do you deal with sexist comments in your field? How do you deal with that?
Faith?
Faith? Anybody?
Okay. I haven't encountered that yet, because I think most of the times I'm out there and people see me carrying this big camera and everything. They tend to have those good comments, like, you know, because for them, they normally expect like for them to see a man carrying maybe that big camera or something. And they'll be like so curious to find out, oh, how do you do this? How do you get yourself here, you know? But just getting negative sexist comments, I've never encountered it.
Okay, Neha, have you ever encountered such? And if you did, how did you deal with it?
I feel like I encounter it all the time. It's usually not like it's usually not like, you know, go home, back to the kitchen. It's not something like that, but it's you know, it's such that, you know, it's yeah, and it comes often from, sometimes even from the people I'm working with, right? So if I've organized to meet a fixer in a certain country and I've never met that person, you know, and like, I mean, it's, and also, I mean, as an American sometimes too, I think there's this perception that, you know, American women are, you know, loose or fast or something like that, right? So if I'm going to a conservative place, I think people assume that they might be able to get away with more than they would with a woman from their own culture. And so generally, when I was younger, I'll be honest, I was so nervous, right? And I was so like, I didn't want to upset anybody. And so I usually wouldn't say anything. I just sort of smile, and someone would say something stupid and I'd go, ha ha ha. I'm kind of getting over that, you know. Now I'm like a little bit more, you know, I think there's a certain amount of, again, sort of allowance that you make for language and for culture. Maybe they mean to express it this way, and clearly they're not trying to, they clearly don't have bad intentions.
Yeah.
Sometimes things where people will say, oh, well, why aren't you married yet? Or, you know, what are, you know, those kinds of questions. And I just say, I'm not married because I'm working. Why aren't you married? You know, like I'll sometimes come back at them a little bit because, you know, it's, I'm there to work and they're there to work. And if it were a man in my position, they would not say, why aren't you married, Mike? You know, like that wouldn't be a question that Mike gets. It's just a question I get because I'm a woman. So I think, you know, I don't want to upset people. I don't want to, you know, come off as this, you know, very, you know, rigid person, but I also want to start being a woman who shows that, you know, these comments are not always going to go with no, you know, with no pushback, you know, that there's, you can't always make comments like that and just get away with it, that there's sometimes going to be someone, please don't say that to me. And it's something as simple as that, you know, please stop asking me if I'm married. You know, that has nothing to do with our work. And it can be polite, it can be quiet, and it can be one time. And then usually people are very respectful and they say, okay, all right, sorry, you know, and then we work. But I think it's important, you know, especially as women and the first women, stage women in the field. And I can't imagine what it's like in the Gambia. I mean, I bet you're dealing with this quite a bit as one
I am dealing with this industry every single day. I am dealing with it every single day. And it's not outside, it's your own circle. It's the circle that you're dealing with yourself. It's not going to the field and get people tell you, but the people that you're dealing with are the people that give you these comments, you know?
Yeah.
So it's happening. And like you said, the industry is just coming up and people are getting used to having a lot of journalists around, people doing this and having a negative mindset about our work because they're yet to understand everything that we do. So I do it every day.
You guys know, are you familiar with Christiana Amanpour? Like the CNN broadcaster. So I was really, really lucky, and I got to meet her once at school. While I was at school, she came to school to speak to students, and I remember like someone asked her this, and she said, you know, one of the ways that I deal with this is, you know, when I'm carrying my camera equipment, and Faith, you reminded me of this. She says, a man will always come and ask, can I carry that for you? Yeah, and then being polite, you know, and that's how they were raised, and that's wonderful. That means their moms did a good job, you know. But she said, I would never say yes. I would never say yes. I would say, no, thank you. I've got it. And even if she was tired and even if it was heavy, she would still carry it. She was like, I don't want, you know, all of these guys thinking that I can't carry my own camera. So it's little things like no one's doing anything wrong, but it's these small messages and these small ways of standing up and saying, oh, we're perfectly capable of carrying the camera too, that I think will resonate in a big way.
Yeah, they're not really very direct comments. The comments are not direct.
No, never.
Yes, they're not direct. It's just indirect most of the time, and you know, tend to think about it, and you're like, okay, this comment meant this.
I was starting my career. I hope everyone was male except me. So I was moving around in company of men. And since it's a hardship region, we will always we sleep outside. Everywhere I go, I'm with these men. And each and every time people will ask them, why can't you even leave this girl alone for some few minutes? Like we would even like to talk to her. And they'll tell that person, no. You know what? Every person takes care of their treasures. She's our treasure. You don't get to get close to her. So at the end of the day, I don't think I've ever been at a close place where I think I've been like a victim of sexist comments, and I think I'm never sensitive about it.
Okay.
But all in all, I believe there are ladies who go through such. I've seen it, I've read about it, but it all again depends on your personality as an individual. Because at the end of the day, it depends also with the culture of a place. They might be whatever they say to them, it doesn't mean an insult. According to them, it doesn't mean an insult. But from where you stand, it is insulting.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, you just need to know how about it. If it is insulting, you just let that person know this is no. Yeah. I think I didn't take this very well. Instead of you keeping it and it ends up like hurting you inside. You just deal with that at that particular moment. Because one thing I learned with men is if you don't this the barrier, they'll keep on pushing and pushing and pushing. Yeah.
So I am so happy that we had this conversation. The conversation was supposed to be on capturing disasters, capturing those challenges, but it has also turned a little bit into a girl talk. I don't know if you guys realize that in a way, which is really good because I can see on the chat column the fact that we talked about psychological, emotional stress for journalists. It seems it touched a lot of people. See that he almost quit because of emotional stress. He faced covering elections, subsequent post-election violence. So a lot of people feel like this psychological support should be put in place for journalists. So I am so happy that both Faith and Neha did put that on the table because I think it's really important. And it's not something that is really considered. It's not talked about because to them, we don't have emotions when it comes to these things, and we do have. So finally, it's almost 4 o'clock Gambian time, and I know 5 o'clock in Kenya. Faith, I think I'm making it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't hear you. we just yes. So I just want both of you to just give your final words in relation to African journalism, you know, because you talked about some of the tips that journalists can use generally, but African journalism, you guys, Neha, you're not an African, but no matter what, you're working in an African setting, reporting across Africa, so you know how the culture is here. So just give tips for journalists out there who want to practice in an African setting. What are these tips?
Am I on mute? No, I'm not on mute.
Yeah.
I think, you know, and of course I'm speaking as an outsider who's been very welcomed into so many different settings. And I think that would be one of the biggest things that I could say I've taken away is, you know, I've reported in, I don't know, 10 countries, you know, across different cultures, across different languages. And, you know, to everybody, I am an outsider, right? And I think the thing that I have been very privileged to have experienced is being welcomed by so many families, by so many individuals, by so many communities, organizations, even in some cases by some governments, you know, and so like, I think the biggest asset when you're reporting, I believe, the region across East African region or across the continent is that people are welcoming and they're warm and they want to share their stories mostly, of course, you know, if for the most part. So I think that's the asset, right? I mean, using your relationship, using those relationships with communities and individuals and saying, look, tell me what is going on in your life. Tell me how I can share. What can I share? What can I show people where you live? And, you know, I've done stuff on disasters. I've done reporting on disasters. I've also done reporting on arts and culture and, you know, human rights organizations and the way things are changing. And so I think, you know, showing that you're interested not only in the challenging, not only in the difficult, not in the sad, but also in showing what are people doing to fight this. I think one of the things that I try to be sensitive to is, and this is not just in the African context, this is everywhere, right? But not turning people into victims. So whether I'm reporting on Black Lives Matter in the US or whether I'm reporting on Kenyan Lives Matter in Kenya, I mean, the point of that is to empower people and to show, you know, this is what's happening. And you could look at this as victims of police violence, but you could also look at it as survivors of police violence. And you could show what communities are doing, whether it's Mathare or it's Detroit, Michigan, you know, what are people doing to fight back? And so I think that in the context of reporting on the continent, I think I saw someone say you're not an outsider. Oh, I love that. Thank you so much.
You're not. You're not.
Yeah.
That makes me feel. But yeah, I think it's, you know, allying yourselves with the communities that you're working with and creating those relationships, and then really putting people highlighting not only what's happening to the communities in a bad sense, but also what communities and what people are doing to fight back. I mean, I think that's what makes for some really strong journalism, and
Yeah.
that's what helps empower.
Yeah, and you're not an outsider. I have to stress that, because the fact that you're able to fit in, you know, the African continent and report across Africa is really good, having to do with all those challenges. So thumbs up to you. You're totally proud of us.
It means a
Yeah.
lot.
So Faith,
Yeah.
you are an African reporting in Africa. What would you tell an African out there?
When doing these disaster risk stories, or any other story for that matter, do not go with a fixed mind, especially if involving maybe a victim or something, because once you have a fixed mind, it will hinder you from getting to see other angles and other aspects of the story. So you need to go with an open mind, a neutral mind, go get the story and be able to balance it accordingly, for you to be able to like give each party a time to be able to tell their story. And also Africa is of so diverse culture. You might go to this culture, find out that whatever they consider wrong, to this other culture, it might not be, it might actually not be wrong. So being able to be open, do your research intensively, and be able to see that whatever story you do, if if according to this culture, this is right, this other one, this is wrong, how are you going to get a balance on the two? That is important here.
Yeah, I think what you talk about, Faith, is really important. Research, so that you won't be surprised when you get there. I think research is a very important tip for everybody. So time is up. I want the study to go for 2 hours because I think these are very, very brilliant women that working with you guys, having this conversation with you guys has been really amazing. I've learned a lot myself. I've also learned that, you know, from now on, I have to start filming my own stuff because I feel like when I do that, I tell my story better because you have inspired me already, you know. And I don't know for other countries, but in the Gambia, we have few women in photography and video in the Gambia. And I think if journalists start filming their stories themselves, they can tell the story better. So I am your mentor, and I have to be reporting guys with my work, with what I do, because I think you're really inspiring. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And thank you to Diraj for organizing such an amazing discussion that is really timely because we are dealing with a global pandemic, and it's important to know how this is hindering the work of photographers and people who have to film videos to tell their stories. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
So much.